Hi, I'm Viresh Maharaj, Chief Executive of Sanlam Corporate Sales and Marketing, and today I'd like to speak to you about the impact that millennials can have on their retirement funding. Now, millennials can broadly be classified as individuals born between the early 80s and the late 1990s, so it's a fairly broad group, and they've had a specific experience in their formative years that lead to many of them demonstrating similar characteristics. Typically, they're the best educated generation that's ever been, and that makes sense because of the access to information and education over time. But we find that they're more in debt than any previous generation, and this can be attributed largely to peer pressure and retail pressure and spending habits, as well as a lack of financial literacy. Now, in our view, millennials are the most at-risk generation for poor retirement funding outcomes, despite the breadth and depth of information and tools available to assist members of all generations to fund for a better retirement. The reasons why millennials are the most at-risk generation is because of the change in the job market, where we find that millennials are projected to have between 12 to 15 jobs in their lifetimes, and that means that they have many more opportunities to withdraw their savings as they switch jobs. And that is the number one reason why many people cannot reach a decent retirement outcome, and that's because of the lack of preservation when changing jobs. So just to recap that, millennials are the most at-risk generation because they will be changing jobs more often, which means they're exposed to the temptation and risk of withdrawing savings more so than any previous generation. Now, there are a number of factors that exacerbate this risk. Typically, millennials are well educated but demonstrate low levels of financial literacy, even basic levels of financial literacy, to the extent that many millennials don't understand how compound interest works, nor do they understand how to budget appropriately. Typically, millennials do not have enough wealth accumulated to be of economic interest to financial advisors, which means that advisors are not actively prospecting amongst millennials to provide high-quality financial advice. Millennials have experienced the poor outcomes of their parents, so they've become distrusting of financial services. Their parents may have done the right things through their careers and now sit with a problem where they do not have enough to sustain them into retirement, and it now falls on to the millennial children to take care of their parents to some extent. And this creates a level of distrust amongst this generation, having seen the poor outcomes of their parents. You add these factors together, it means that millennials pose a unique challenge for the financial services industry, and it's one that we as an industry have been reluctant to take on in an appropriate manner. We often hear the sentiment, or receive the sentiment, that millennials are not engaged with savings, millennials are not engaged with financial services. And our view is that perhaps traditional financial services have not been engaged with millennials. And it sounds the same, but there's a subtle difference. As an industry, there's a lot of work that we can do, a lot of introspection that we can apply in order to become more relevant to the buying processes of millennials if we want to be more relevant in their lives. And there's a pressing need to become more relevant in their lives, because our stats show that millennials make up anywhere between 40 to 55% of South Africa's working population, which means that they're the biggest segment of South Africa's working population as a generation. And this is something we've got to take more seriously if we need to deliver value through to our customers. And there are a number of ways to do that. The obvious one is through technology, but not technology for technology's sake. Technology with a purpose. And in the context of retirement funding, it's to provide information and to reduce friction. It's not about being friends. It's not about networking. It's not about adding value in unrelated spheres of an individual's life. It's simply about being relevant by providing the right information in the right format and reducing the friction of working with your financial services provider. And there are a number of ways to do this. One of those, which has been highlighted through the research, is through retirement benefits counseling, which is a new requirement of legislation that aims to provide and empower individuals with enough information to make a better decision at various points in time. Most relevant for millennials is at withdrawal, so when they change jobs. So again, this comes back to why they're the most at-risk generation. By getting the right information at that point in time, that helps millennials to understand the consequences of their decisions. We aim to influence more millennials to make more appropriate decisions that lead to better outcomes at retirement. It's not a silver bullet, but it is a step forward.